would you get up on that step for?
Your tall ass.
A tall ass indeed.
What's up, world? I am with this beautiful, amazing superstar of a person. This woman right here is golden. I call her my queen. I call her the queen. She is the queen. She's dope. She's magical. Look at these earrings. Rock it, rock it, rock it, rock it. We are at UNT down here recording this show for EnergyNMotion.
Awesome episode.
Tell us about it.
So we're going to be talking about a beautiful but very uncomfortable topic called fear. How many of y'all familiar with that? I think each of you. So I needed to talk to my brother in faith about our relationships with fear, because who else to have a safe space conversation with than this one?
Yeah, so I am honored to be a part of this conversation. We're going to be recording in this room right here. So we're about to go in here and dive in and deal with our own personal fears. Yeah. And we're going to talk with you about your personal fears. And we're going to see what it looks like. So this is raw. This is uncut. This is real. Yeah. Real people talking about real shit. And we love you, man. So y'all stay tuned and check us out. Raw's going to hit it up. We're going to jump it off. Peace.
Enjoy.
One love. You're heading on your own love.
All right, so I have a couple of different questions for you.
Okay.
And I know you got a couple of different questions for me too.
Mm-hmm.
But the topic of fear is such a sensitive one. I think people are afraid to be vulnerable. I think people are afraid to share their actual thoughts about what fear is experienced like within them, because it makes them seem weak. We've socialized people into thinking that if you have fear in you, if you're afraid, that that's a sign of weakness when everybody's experiencing it. So are we all weak or are we all human?
Yeah, so fear is definitely traditionally looked at as a sign of weakness, especially in men. I think men struggle with that, but also women in their own way. And are we all weak or are we all human? I would say we're definitely all human, because a part of being human is the awareness and the ability to embrace your weakness, because we are very vulnerable creatures. Physically, we're very vulnerable. Our skin is vulnerable. You put us out in nature, we think, but we're not really good like predators or defenders.
No.
So yes, that is something that makes us feel vulnerable, which is stemming from weakness. I think one of the reasons that we as humans have universally looked at vulnerability as a weakness is because when I see somebody else who is vulnerable, and it really just kind of like puts a mirror in my face.
Yeah.
You know, because like I don't necessarily like want to experience what they are potentially experiencing, because everything is like, what can I get out of it? Or like, what's the hurt that's going to cause
very
to me?
Egocentric.
Everything is very egocentric. So I think that has a lot to do with the group fear, is because it's always going to be like, well, what if that happened to me, per se?
Or almost triggering, like when that happened to me and I don't want to remember that, so I got to get the hell away from you because you're reminding me of something I'm suppressing.
Exactly, for sure. And
the brain itself is so fascinating, right? How if we experience something traumatic, it will erase it from our conscious mind. It'll push it deep into the subconscious, where if something hits it, a smell or a commercial that we used to see at that time in life, it'll bring it up and we'll be triggered. But fear lurks so deeply beneath the surface. Do you think that the human brain could handle if it was actually processing all the things that it ever had to have been afraid of?
No. And I think that's why we suppress it, just out of survival. I think, and it's interesting that you said just smell, just on a segue, you know, smell are one of those primary things that really like activates that sense. I think
that memory.
I think smell and I want to say taste, like instantly like put you in a certain space. But one thing that you had spoke about in your notes one time was about the childhood and how that evolves to adult. And there are many things that are carried over. And if you're not correctly educated on how to deal with certain fears and deal with certain pains, what happens, in my opinion, is that we magnify those things.
Okay.
Because your memory is never the exact replication of what happened.
It never is. You're remembering what you remembered.
You remember what you remember. And typically, just like if someone gives you 100 compliments and one negative, you're going to hold on to that negative one. And that's just human nature for whatever reason. So when you think back and you have this fearful moment, you're going to magnify the things that was most traumatic about it.
Absolutely.
And not really look at like how you overcame it, or somebody came to help you, or somebody gave you some encouraging words. So 15 years ago, that's what you magnify, and then that's what you continue to process and carry on. So now when you encounter that situation, that's the first thing that you think about, and it becomes like this huge thing. I was reading a Tony Evans book called No More Excuses, and he was talking about fear. And the analogy that he gave was on a morning day, you have fog. Mm-hmm. And he said that in like a 5-mile radius, all the fog that you see was only like, and my numbers aren't correct, but something to the effect of it's like only a gallon of water and the rest is just oxygen. Mm. But it appears that it's just so dense, and that's kind of how fear is. Only a small percentage of it's something that's real, and the rest is your imagination.
Absolutely. And how fantastic the human imagination is, because we get to imagine in situations that would so never happen, be so unlikely, but because we're trying to be prepared. And I think that's really what it comes down to when it is being fearful about something. It's, I'm trying to hold on to the worst part of these situations that happen to me so that the next time I encounter a situation that reminds me of it, I can be as prepared as possible because I remember the worst part of what occurred before. And it's like, that is so twisted. It's almost like insurance. It's like, I'm just saving this and I'm investing in it. And maybe I'll need it at some point. Maybe I won't, but I'm going to hold on to it. And it's not helpful.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, that self-protection. So that's really how we operate. And then I think society perpetuates that. It feeds that. It really like reinforces that, because anything that happens on the micro happens on the macro. Mm. So just like the individual is doing that, I think that the community is doing that. I think that the country is doing that. I think that the religion is doing that. Everyone's like preparing for the worst case scenario, and then everything else is like magnified. So because we make up the community, we make up the country. And yeah, it just kind of continue to grow. So I think for me, like looking at that, let me ask you a question.
Yeah, come on.
If I can,
come on,
Miss Rah. I love that laugh too. That laugh is so genuine. I love the analogy of the self-protection. Okay, so that's a real thing. So how do I, as an individual, get to the point where I do not allow my imagination to run so rampant through self-protection, and possibly maybe use my imagination or any type of tools to kind of like grow out of that very real thing of trying to protect myself? Because we don't want to undermine threat or danger or fear, right?
The instinct is there for a reason. Mm-hmm. And so we do want to value the fact that when you have a gut instinct of, something isn't right, to listen to that. But it's oftentimes how we've beat the drum of the narrative of that worst case scenario so many times that is the only direction our head can look. Those are the only blinders we have on, is worst case scenario. And I think that's why things like the law of attraction are so powerful, because it's telling you to focus your energy and your attention on what you want. Because people don't realize how powerful their energy and their attention is in their life, because they're often sloppy thinkers. They're sloppy feelers. They're just thinking and feeling whatever. And then when negative things or positive things, as they categorize them, pop up, they're like, well, how did that happen? Why did that happen in my life? It's like, what you been thinking? Mm-hmm. You probably were on a streak of positivity if all of a sudden you came into some good luck. It's not luck. You actually were thinking and vibrating in that space. And if you're always thinking about, oh, I'm always running into traffic, you always gonna run into traffic. And so I think there has to be a balance between being mindful of the useful parts of what you're taking away from a traumatic situation or a painful situation, the objective parts that actually can be utilized in situations in the future, not blinded by the feelings of it. But then I think we also have to be able to take that and elevate ourselves to being imaginative about how could these all go right. All these things that are so important to me, how can I look at them in such a way that doesn't make me feel like I'm so full of it, I don't believe that.
Okay, hold on. So check this out. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm going to tell you something that's very interesting. And this is how tricky the mind is. just when you said imagining everything going right, inside of me instantly fear came up. And this is so these are the things that I think are important as it relates to growth.
Yes.
Because what we're speaking about now is becoming mindful, right? So when you said that, inside of myself, I was listening, and then I noticed some emotions. When you said everything going right, fear came in. And instantly I asked myself, why did you feel fear when she said everything going right? So in a millisecond, it was like, boom. The reason I felt fear when she said everything going right is because when I picture everything going right, the very next thing that I think about is one of those things not going right anymore.
Yes.
You know, this all crashing, you know what I'm saying? So I want to hold on to something going right so bad that it's fearful to hear everything going right.
I love that.
And that is huge. I think, and I am processing this as I'm speaking, but being able to recognize these subconscious thoughts that are driving the conscious behavior becomes so important.
Yes.
And I'm only going to be able to do that through practice, through conversations like this. And that's why this kind of stuff is very, very important. So I didn't mean to cut you off.
Cut me off. And you know I'm long-winded, Seneca. Just cut me off. And also, anytime you're actively listening and you have a thought that dope, cut me the fuck off. Dope. Yes, come on. Here for it. But see, that makes me want to almost go back in time to start thinking about when our imaginations were their biggest. So that's childhood. And we talked a little bit about it. But do you recall anything from your childhood that stood out as a fear that you still face nowadays?
Yeah. We actually talked about this at your place.
Yeah, sitting around the fire. Yeah.
Sitting around the campfire. I must say, dope environment. I love that to death. Lasers and campfires for sure.
That's a dope mixtape.
Man, that's a dope mixtape. Man, beautiful people, beautiful conversation. For me, one of the most scary moments that I felt was when I was about 8 years old, and I was laying on my back, looking up into the sky, like on a summer afternoon, playing basketball, just a kid running around. And when I looked up into the clouds, it was the first time that I noticed how big like the universe was, how big the world was. And I had never paid attention to that. I'm riding my bike, I'm playing football, I'm not thinking about the universe. And that day I did. And the very next thing that came was the fear of how small I was. And then my mind just started to ask these questions like, what the fuck is going on? You know what I'm saying? Like, the world is bigger than my neighborhood. I was living in Pleasant Grove at the time, and I was just like, man, you know, it just dawned on me that like the world is so much more than like me just doing this little thing that I'm doing. And that was the first thing. And that still carries with me today because I'm always a critical thinker like you and thinking about different things. So I sometimes still look around myself and ask, like, what the fuck is going on? You know what I'm saying? Like, why am I here? You know, why am I this small little speck of a dot on this pebble of a planet, you know, circulating and all this stuff that everybody is making seem like is so important, which aspects of it is, it's like, I'm questioning these things. I don't really feel connected to these things because everything's so vast. So that was the primary thing for me.
And you still experience that to this day of sometimes going about your daily routine and being like, what the true fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do that too. And I love that because it lets me know that I'm not as sleep as I could be. It really reminds me because there are so many people who you drive past, who you walk next to, who don't ever think to themselves, what the fuck is going on? They just are going along with it. Like, this is normal. Like, any of this makes sense. And the only reason I think I can keep my sanity is because I check in and I'm like, nah, this is weird. This is bizarre. And this is interesting. And I'm here for the experience. So I'm not going to complain, but I am going to keep an eye out.
Yeah. Now, you know what I believe? I believe that every single person on some level questions this.
Do you?
I do. I believe every single human. Now, it may be to different degrees and different considerations and contemplations, but even the person who's like, you know, just looks like they're completely just wrapped up in everything and immersed in Gucci this and BMW, and I'm turned up, I'm lit, you know.
Yeah.
I believe that we all have our bathroom mirror moments, our moments where we sit back and we just look and we're just like man, like what the fuck. Now, the vocabulary or the process may be different. And the reason that I fundamentally believe that is because during a time in my life when I really started looking at myself, I started journaling. And I would put all these transparent thoughts on pieces of paper. And this is how I created my whole movement and company, Open Minds Only. But I started to journal these thoughts, and I would give them to my homeboys. And some people identified with it. But then there were some people that I would give this information to, and it was the person that I least expected. And they would be like, hey, man, like this is dope. Like, I kind of feel this way, too. Mm-hmm. But if I seen that individual, I would never have assumed that. And that has happened so many times to the point where I can personally say with conviction that we're all walking around with this thing in the back of our head to some degree because we're all human.
Yeah.
We're all human.
And I feel like even with us all being human, I do agree that to some degree we're all conscious of there being something else going on, especially bubbling beneath the surface. I think, though, a lot of us run from that. And so some of us answer the call, and some of us are like spending all of our life distracting, suppressing, because we feel crazy for hearing a voice in our head. We're told that, like, if you're hearing voices and it's not your original thoughts, whatever those are your original thoughts, but if it's not what you think you're thinking, you should be afraid. You should ignore that voice. And it's like, no, that's the voice you need to tune into the most. Yeah.
Now that I 100% agree with. I believe that there are people who are sweeping more stuff under the rug in the form of entertainment, games, fads, trends to high degrees than others. But yeah, I can definitely vibe and rock with that. And I know that because I once was an individual who was actively doing that. You know, I'm talking about sweeping everything up under the rug, taking on all these different identities, putting on all these different masks to run away from the only question that truly is, which is, why the fuck am I here? Like, who am I? You know, and fear. I've always said in the books that I've read, fear is going to be the nucleus toxic emotion that all other toxic emotions are birthed from. You know, jealousy, insecurity, anger, resentment. They all come from some form of fear. Yeah. And that fear, in my opinion, is also going to be attached to some form of attachment, you know, control.
You are hitting the nail on the head, because attachment is a word that I feel like is closely associated with fear. Because if we are at any point considering losing something, biggest fear. And that's why we don't even strive to gain things, because it's like, what if I lose it? I don't want to have it for fear of losing it. Yeah. So I wouldn't even allow myself the enjoyment of the thought, because that scares me, just the thought.
And then what we subconsciously do without even really thinking about it is when we see an individual who has attained a lot, we will ostracize that person. They think that they're all that. They may not even given any of those type of signs, but I've seen people downplay other individuals who are really on their shit, really on their grind, really getting their thing. They're accumulating the things that they want in their life, and we will demonize that person because us going on that journey and trying to attain those things ourselves is too difficult or too fearful or too challenging. So when we see somebody doing it, we will put them down to make ourselves feel better. Yeah. You know?
Because at least what we're putting them down with is familiar, because we can't even vibe with what they're talking about because we haven't opened our minds up to what they had to become uncomfortable and open themselves up to achieve that. Because we've decided that we want to be crabs in a bucket. So when I see you crawling out, instead of trying to find the way out with you, I'm going to try to pull you back down. Because I want you to stay with me. Misery loves company. Yeah, I don't want you to see what's over there, because if it's not good, then I can at least say I was trying to protect you. And if it is good, then why are you over there and I'm not? And that's so scary. It's so scary for people who you love to risk something, especially when you're afraid on their behalf and they're not afraid, because there is some type of acknowledgement most people need to do within themselves of, am I afraid of this going wrong, or am I afraid of this going right for you?
Yeah. And then so it gets even more interesting, because now as an individual who may be pursuing these things, it's typical for us sometimes to dim our light and downplay ourselves in fear of that persecution and that judgment for other people, thinking that we're too much and so forth and so on. So it really becomes like this this self-sustaining cancer and toxic that it just has to be implemented, and we are the ones that drive it. It's really almost like the Willie Lynch syndrome that was put on Black people, just
to self-govern.
Putting that system out, and then we just self-govern it. We push it, and now it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, you know.
But that's also like the domestication that happens to all people. It's exactly like what happened to Black people, but everybody is domesticated into the sense of you need to know what's right and you need to know what's wrong. You need to know about the rewards. You need to know about the punishments. And then once we've gotten to a certain age, people don't have to remind us anymore. We are so thoughtful of the rules that we were raised with, not being also taught that sometimes these don't apply. So we are always trying to grapple with this justice system, this inner morality that we weren't given an opportunity to agree to. We just took on these agreements of this is what's right and this is what's wrong. But those came from people who have subjective viewpoints. So you don't really get the opportunity to hear an open-minded perspective.
Now, so I want to speak to that because there's a duality in that. I believe that when people lack the ability to govern themselves, then you now give that power to somebody else. So when you speak of things like these rules that are put in place by a society, to me, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but to me, another evolution of like spiritual maturity is when I don't necessarily like demonize the powers that be. What I start to be able to have to see is, okay, why did it become this way? Now, of course, we have people who have ulterior motives, but when you look at something objectively and honestly, I can now look at a body of people who understood that if people drank a lot of alcohol, if people were sexually just free to do what they wanted to do, if people were just doing this and doing this and doing this, then there may not be anything inherently wrong with that per se. But if I get 100 people, then I've seen from experience that 70% of them are not going to be able to function. So now what happens if my motive is to build a society and not necessarily try to empower Rah as an individual, but I want to like build a country or a nation or a society, then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to begin to mandate some things and say, look, this is the parameter that people need to stay in. So for me, whenever I was able to come to that type of perspective on it, now, of course, there may be some ulterior motives hidden in that, but to be fair to them, there's also some legitimacy
Absolutely.
to that. And what that does is it helps me now to elevate my consciousness in such a way to say things like responsible free spirit, where I'm able to say, you know what, there's some legitimacy to this, but there's also some BS in it. So how do I get to the point where I'm able to eat the meat and spit out the bones, where I'm able to self-govern myself and still have that freedom? And I've noticed that being able to look at it in that way helps me come from a place of not having resentment or bitterness towards the system, which helps me come from a place of gratitude, which helps me come from a place where I can more objectively see, well, Seneca, like, be honest with yourself. Like, you really do need to stay away from that, whatever that particular thing is. And coming from a more healthy place allows me to do that. But it also allows me to say, oh, that's just some bullshit. Like, I know that I can govern myself in that, and it's completely okay.
Exactly. And I think the key word you said was duality, because I agree with all of that. I think the thing that makes me nervous, though, or not even nervous when it comes to domestication, I'm actually very comfortable with it because it's something that's inevitable. It's necessary also. But we also don't teach people how to turn around and then look at their own circumstances, their own situations objectively. We give a blanket statement of this is what's right and this is what's wrong. And then we don't empower them to, even though we expect this structure to be followed in this society, in this community, you can have your own thoughts. You can't have your own experiences, but this is the reason why. I think we train people instead of teach people nowadays. And that's the part that makes me nervous. I definitely think that we need structure. I think that's necessary because it makes us feel safe. It's sometimes a false sense of security, that structure, because all of this is an illusion and can be ripped away immediately. But it's still the idea that we still need to have that balance, that duality that you spoke to of, yes, I do need to stay away from that for my own well-being, but I can govern myself well enough to know I'm staying away from that because of me, not because of the idea that that's just wrong as is.
Yeah. So like, I think I was watching one of your shows, and the conversation was about like how a black person should act or something like that, you know, and the different stereotypes that are placed on that, you know, and that's something that's very interesting from a social standpoint. Is going back to fear, is us allowing to the degree, which is it's huge. To the degree that we allow outside people to dictate what we do. And I was thinking about it. When you walk inside of a room that you've never been in, and there's a lot of people in there are things that you are doing, that I am doing, how you stand, where you sit, who you talk to, who you don't talk to, how you say this, how you say that.
The eye contact you make.
Every single thing that you're doing generally is dictated by how you're perceived. You know what I'm saying? Like the persona that you want to give off. Now, this can be done healthily. I can do this in a healthy manner. I can come in and be like, okay, I want to be very self-aware. I want to project this type of image for this type of purpose. And I think that's okay. I think that most of the time, though, it happens almost like we're in high school. We walk inside of a room and we're so self-conscious a lot of the times. And it's like, man, like, how do we as adults, like, still carry that from these high school and these child years, which just leads me to believe that, you know, we're, even in our adult stages, you know, we still are in the beginning of our full consciousness, even in death. 'Cause you can go to a retirement home. I went to a retirement home and I'm listening to old women and old men talk, and in their own way, they're talking about the same shit that high schoolers are talking about, just on an elderly level.
There's nothing new under the sun. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the sweet thing about people. As you grow up, you realize that when you're younger, all you see are the differences between the age groups. You see what you can do, what you can't do. You see what people who are 5 years older than you or 2 decades older than you are achieving or getting to do or getting in trouble with. And you see all these differences. But I asked my dad a couple years ago, my mom had just passed that year. I asked him because he was reminiscing, talking about hopping fences. And he had recently had surgery, so he was unable to do some of those things. And I was like, do you ever just sit and think like, dang, I'm in my 50s and I have 2 grown kids? And he was like, I do, because I still feel like that 17-year-old kid hopping fences. He's not growing up. He's growing up in humanness, but his spirit is still maturing. It's still thriving and growing and thirsting for new experiences and wanting to explore and wanting to jump and be free and to fly. And it's like, there's that really deep song, I don't know who sings it, My Body is a Cage, that keeps me from dancing with the one I love. It's real deep. I'm gonna find it.
No, I don't. Is it new, old? Or?
Oh, it's real old. I heard it on like a House episode. Did you ever watch House?
I did not.
Oh, House is such a great show.
House? What is that? House?
That's that medical show with Hugh, I think it's Hugh Lowry, and he's like that smart ass doctor.
Well, you know, I missed a lot.
You did. You were away.
I missed a lot, yeah. But I mean, we still watched a lot of TV there, but I was not watching TV. But yeah, okay, so it was a real popular show. It was a real popular show, and that song on there, it wasn't the original place that the song was played. I think it's a Johnny Cash song, maybe. Okay. But it's My Body is a Cage that keeps me from dancing with the one I love. My mind holds the key. And so it's the idea that the door really is locked from the inside. And that's the most frustrating part about it. That's the most frustrating part about fear or any of these negative emotions that we experience. It's, I feel stuck in here with these, but I'm the only one that could get me out. The gatekeeper.
And I don't know how to get me out.
It's such a fascinating concept.
And I don't want to ask people for help because they're going to think I'm crazy that I don't know how to get myself out. And it's like, but nobody else knows how to get themselves out either. Yeah. So we should talk about
Everybody's thinking the same thing. So that reminds me of this movie, V for Vendetta. You ever seen that?
I did see that. Awesome movie.
Beautiful movie. We need to start doing movie nights.
We should do movie nights and book clubs.
Book club, movie nights. Me and Melissa was talking about doing like movie nights.
Shout out to Melissa. We love you,
Shout
girl.
out to Melissa. We love you. Shout out to the whole like Kindred family and
Everybody.
And Satisfy My Soul.
Yes.
And all that DMC.
Healing Project DFW.
All of that.
The whole tribe.
The whole tribe. So V for Vendetta. So towards the end, whenever the woman was kidnapped by the masked man, I forget all the names.
Same.
And she was in the prison. The scene of him threatening her, and he kept threatening her, and finally he threatened her with death. And she was just like I'm ready.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Fuck
I'm
it.
done. And he walked out and she opened up her eyes and she was like, what the fuck? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's going on? So she comes out of the cell and she looks down and she sees this mannequin holding a gun, but it looks like a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole time when she was locked in her cell, it looked like a soldier the entire time. So this time she's looking, and then the camera goes back. Excellent directing on this film.
Yes.
And you can see that it's a mannequin, and she walks out and she sees that, the whole time she was in this dude's basement, know, and there was no guard,
she could have left.
She could have left, but she was in prison. But the beautiful part is whenever she walked out, before she went outside, she met with the guy, and she was like, why did you keep me in there? He was like, I did this for you. I did this so you could be free. And she was like, what do you mean? She's crying. The camera's spinning around, and she's like, what do you mean? I did this for you. I did this so you could be free. And she finally got it, and she walked outside, and it was raining, and like the drops was hitting her face and stuff, and you could tell like she had been reborn.
Yeah, she was being cleansed.
She was being cleansed, and it's so this is like a very biblical Christian, but it comes from a lot of different ancient teachings that you live when you die. It's the phoenix, you know what I'm saying? It is the purifying through the fire. So what I take from that personally and what I've experienced in my life, though it is very, very difficult and very, very uncomfortable, but it is when we lean into our fears. Because when we lean into our fear, we're going to be forced to evaluate questions that would not be posed in places of comfort.
Absolutely.
So you're almost going into a whole nother universe whenever you lean inside of your fear internally. And when you lean inside of that and deal with that and ask those questions and come out on the other side with answers, you are renewed. It's like you're going through this death. And when you come out, you have this whole different perspective. And that is an ongoing cycle. So that is actually one of the benefits, and there's many benefits of fear.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the benefits of fear that I take away as a lifestyle for me. But it still doesn't make it easier whenever a new fear comes along.
Oh, of course not. Act brand new. Every time something scary come up.
Yeah.
Brand new. Like,
Brand new.
What is this? Why do I have to deal with this? Like,
yes.
Just cowering. And then you realize that that's the ebb and flow of life, though, is that as soon as you start to get your footing, it's almost like walking, if you use walking as the analogy. As soon as you're really balanced on one foot, it is time to lean into the next and to be off balance again, and to trust that that next foot will land on the ground, will support you so that you can balance on it and then get off balance again. And I think we just have to get comfortable in the discomfort of not knowing, not being prepared for every step, not being able to guard everything. There's a great quote, you don't have to have it all figured out to move forward. And you don't. We think that we do. We judge each other if we don't. But what we think we're so prepared for are oftentimes the situations that we're manifesting that we didn't even want. You're preparing for something, meaning that you're bringing attention to it, meaning you're bringing it to yourself, and you didn't even want that. So that's where it lies, or the idea lies, of focusing on what you want, not because other things won't arise, but knowing that what you want is at the end of it will at least motivate you to continue going. If you were looking for something bad to happen and something bad happens, you're going to be stagnant in that. But if you're looking for something good to happen and something bad happens, you will get back up to keep pursuing that good thing. So it's not just the feel goods, it's also the actual momentum you're building.
Yeah, and I can really relate to that because on my journey, I like to have stuff figured out.
Of
You know,
course.
I
It's
like
so
to
much
have
more
it figured
comfortable
out.
that way.
Like many people. But I've come to learn now because so much cool and amazing stuff has happened. Is as you were speaking to, it's just about going in a particular direction and knowing what that direction looks like. And I'm starting to relearn failure on a whole nother level.
Say that.
Because there's like cool projects that I'm working on right now and all these people I'm putting together. I'm like, man, I hope this is successful. But I'm looking back at other cool projects that I tried to put together and it really didn't manifest quite the way that I had hoped. And in that moment, I was like, I failed or it wasn't a success. But now, as I'm moving forward, some of the key people who are in these newer cool projects came from those old cool projects. So though it was a quote unquote failure, it really wasn't because I gained a badass contact.
Yeah.
I learned 3 or 4 different things. And then I was able to see some stuff inside of myself. So now when I enter this new space, I got this badass contact.
Yeah.
I got these 3 things that I learned and this thing I learned about myself. So it's like, was that a failure? So it just opens up the scope of this is a journey.
Yes.
You know.
And not a destination.
And not a destination. So that's something I've been really, really processing. And by looking at it that way, it really helps reduce the fear because now I'm not really so much concerned about it working or not working or it being successful or not successful. I'm like, look, I believe in this journey. But that's the important thing. If you can find something that you fundamentally believe in and you can now begin to cultivate that stick-to-itness.
That genuine desire to stick to it. Not I should stick to it, but I want to.
Yes. So I have this thing called being socially reborn, you know, and I feel like that I've been socially reborn. And being socially reborn kind of comes from this space that I'm speaking about now. And I'm using a lot of biblical terms today, but I take from all different perspectives because they're all equally beautiful. But as it speaks about in the Bible, whenever you become born again or saved, the reason that is so important and the reason that gives a person so much confidence is because you have overcame the greatest fear, which is death. So when you go to heaven, this magical place, whatever it may be, when you go to heaven, if God has taken away the biggest fear of death, then surely you can face a job loss. Surely you can face a divorce. So that's the whole purpose. And I think that's one of the reasons that make religion so powerful is that it takes away the fear of the ultimate fear, which is death. So the same thing as it relates to being socially reborn. When I begin to take away the ultimate fear of failure socially, because socially failure is probably it's cornerstone to success. If you're trying to be successful, failure is like the
not
death.
too far behind.
Yeah, you know. So when you can overcome failure, now I can overcome all these small little things that may happen along the way. So yeah, but in order to do that, you have to like die to yourself, I guess. In a way.
Yeah. Hence, even conversations such as the ego death, even being able to be reborn. So taking it from the biblical sense and even adding to what they talk about spiritually is that ego death and letting go of these worldly and earthly labels that you've put on yourself to identify yourself and also divide yourself from others when really there is only usness and oneness. And these labels, while they might have helped you navigate, they also limited your experience. And in some areas, it was a blessing to be limited. But in other areas, you actually want to be free. You want to be out of that bubble of the comfort zone. You just don't even know it. It's usually when life presents you with something that doesn't look the way you thought it should, you should be open-minded to it only for the sake of it could be the very catalyst to where you want to be. You know the feeling you want, but you don't know what it looks like. But what life just gave me looks nothing like what I thought it should look like. But instead of listening to that instinct to run, let me lean into it. Let me lean into and embrace the fear so that I can actually look at it for what it is. When you run from something new, which could be good for you, it's like when you're at Fright Fest at Six Flags and these teenagers dressed up as zombies, they jump at you. And if you flinch, they will chase your ass down all through this park. They will be like, they'll tell their zombie friends, you see that one in the plaid? Get her. Because she's easily frightened. But when you actually smile at them, or if you stick around, you don't flinch, they have nothing more to do. It doesn't make them look any more appealing or less zombie, but it changes the moves you make in that situation. You didn't allow them to run you off. You looked at it for what it was, and you found out, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah. So there's a great author named Bo Lozov. Shout out to anybody out there that reads. Reading is like just fundamental to growth. But Bo Lozov, he's written a lot of different books, and one was called "We're All Doing Time." He did like a lot of prison stuff from an Eastern philosophy perspective. And there was this one passage that I'm going to butcher completely, but there was this guy who was looking inside of a cave, and it had all these scary things that was on the inside of this cave. But that cave was in between his destination of where he wanted to go. So every day he would look at that cave, and there was all this spooky stuff that was going on. So he had to deal with this cave. So he went inside of the cave, and he spent all this time trying to get all these things to like leave, these demons and these fears and these insecurities. And he was battling. He was in there battling with these things, going at it. And then one day he got tired, and he just invited them all in. And just sat with them, and it was when he sat with them that, just like the story that you gave about Six Flags, it was when he sat with them that he began to understand that he could really like overcome these things. He began to accept the path in a whole different way. But I've noticed that you can't do that in ego, because ego is looking for the answer.
Yes.
But growth is seldom reaching out and finding something, and more so always going within and discovering something that was already there.
Yeah.
And that's why I love the conversation of internal, because when you use a certain vocabulary of success being going out, but then true success is discovering something that you already have, it feels a certain way.
It does.
Kind of like you say, like a home-cooked meal.
Mm-hmm.
And you almost, when you hear those words, when I hear those words, and the more that I truly become in tune, and I begin to use a certain vocabulary, it's almost like I want to go to my own little space.
Mm-hmm.
I want to sit down. Like right now, I want to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to go inside of a place, inside of myself, and introspectively, like look in. And I've noticed that micro to macro, when I start to feel that way, I don't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need all the answers in that space. I just need to be able to be content. And then the graduation from that now is finding other people who are not success-driven exterior, but to find other people who understand looking internal is the true source of happiness. So now what I do in my corner now, in my solitude, when I find people like that, is I step out into that space. So though I'm stepping out, I'm still going in, because we're going in community. And now you find comfort in community in a different type of way. And it feels organic, and it feels holistic. Now, hopefully, we as individuals can find that in our household. But sometimes people are on different paths and different wavelengths, so we're not able to find that in our household. So we have to go out to other places and communities. Mm-hmm. But I think that knowing that information is a good roadmap to kind of follow for anybody out there listening who is looking for like the internal peace, looking within, and find other people who also know the value of looking within.
Yes. And I really love the idea of going at it in that order, looking within and then seeking community. Mm-hmm. We are definitely groomed to look externally and then to seek community while we're looking around for community, but we don't actually enjoy the interactions we're having because we did not seek within first.
Correct.
So seeking within, and not harping on the idea of you can't love others until you love yourself. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do agree with the idea of the love is better. It's better when you love yourself first, when you're getting high on your own supply in that sense. Yeah. And then you're offering it to other people, because if they don't take it at that point, your fear isn't activated of I'm less than or I'm not enough. It's I know what I'm offering is good stuff. So if you don't want it, maybe you know of something good for you, but you don't know what I got. You don't know how I've got it. And you feel empowered instead of depleted at that point. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I want to give you a chance to bless the people. I always do the take a beat moment, but I want I want to hand it over to you, because at this point, they've heard your buttery smooth voice. Everybody knows how great it is to listen to all of what you have to share. So can you bless the folks with a message about fear?
There was something that I had spoke about a while back about pain being a blessing from God. Because it's in the pain that we are able to identify something that needs to be addressed. So I think that fear works in the same way. Though fear is very uncomfortable, fear is actually the blessing, because the fear, it lets me know, it puts a mirror in front of my face that says, hey, there's something that needs to be done. And when I began to understand, I've read this quote on Facebook, but it was already a favorite of mine, something to the extent of, when I begin to look at my relationships, it's not something to make me happy, but something to make me more conscious, my life will change. So the same thing on this path, when I start to look at my path in life as something not to make me happy, but make me more conscious, I'm able now to identify pain and fear and say, yes, this is a good thing, because I know that I'm going to be able to grow through these things, because it's going to reveal things to me that I was not able to see in my times of peace and rest and comfort. So that is my blessing, the mic, that I want you to really process and understand, that as you're going in this path of growth, lean into your fears so that it can reveal deeper levels of understanding that you would not be able to see otherwise.
And that's exactly what they needed to hear. I know it's exactly what I needed to be reminded of. I know it, but man, this is why it's so beautiful to have community like what we found with each other, because we are human and we will forget. We will wander from what we know to be true, even after we found it and so sweetly embraced it. So to be able to have someone safe to come to and be like, remind me what I know again. Yeah. And then you say it so beautifully, just like that. So thank you.
For sure. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, as you already talked about earlier, you told them a little bit about Open Minds Only, but go ahead and tell them about the movement that you've started in Dallas that will soon enough be worldwide.
Yeah, so I created a company and concept called Open Minds Only, OMO for short. The tagline of Open Minds Only is a community of kindreds who step on people's toes for growth. So if that makes sense to you, then you understand our vibe. I come up with beautiful vocabulary where I use dichotomies and contradictions, like cultural contradiction. I come up with things like positive gossip. Melissa actually gave me that one. But yeah, so this whole movement that I'm putting together is really challenging people to be themselves, but also creating space for people to ask new questions of themselves and see what possibilities may lay ahead. So one of my favorite is responsible free spirits. I love that. That is something that's been birthed inside of me that I'm going to be pushing in 2020. Whatever that means to you, but more so whatever that feels like to you when you hear responsible free spirit, that is truly the movement that Open Minds Only is about. The last thing I'll say is that what I've learned when you think of responsible free spirit, as we spoke about today, there are things that are in place that need to be in place, like honesty, integrity, and truth, and compassion, and empathy. We need these things. But typically, when you just operate on what has been, you make great managers. And managers keep systems going, but they very rarely change and shift culture. It's the risk takers that change and shift culture. So now when you speak about free spiritness, it's about finding your individuality, taking risks, doing things different, going against the grain. And it's that combination of educating yourself and doing it in a comprehensive, intentional manner that I think is the best of both worlds and can push society forward in a way that feels both authentic and also kind of scary, because we don't know what's on the other side, but we embrace that, and that's okay.
Yes. And that is the safe space that you've created for so many with the kindred spirits of Open Minds Only. So you can check Open Minds Only out on Facebook, right?
Yes. You can go to my personal page, which is just Open Minds. I'm also transferring everything over to Open Minds Only TV on Facebook. You can check me out on Instagram, which is _Open Minds Only. Got a website that's going to be coming out very, very soon that I'm working on. We just did an amazing, magical retreat in East Texas. Shout out to Brad and Carol for allowing us to use their 44-acre ranch. We took like 22 people out, and it was dope. Communal living. That's some things that I want to speak about in the future.
There will be a whole episode about that, Seneca. I'm going to give you a whole platform, brother, to talk about it.
But we are going to be, I am putting out the energy right now of a festival in 2020, late spring, that'll give us some time to really plan. I don't have any idea of what it's going to look like, but I didn't have any idea what the retreat was going to look like.
And it was phenomenal.
So anybody that wants to plug into like a real movement and feel what it feels like to be a part of a movement. It's one thing to go out and meditate. It's one thing to go out and socialize. It's one thing to go out and club. But it's another thing to be a part of a movement on a body of people that have a conscious and intentional effect that they want to put on society. When you begin to get around people like that, now this gives purpose. And the cool thing about us is that we're all about that purpose shit. We're all about that, making the world a better place. But we're also all about like doing you and like being and like, living how you want to live. As long as it's do what thy will but harm none. So we're just wrapping up in the lifestyle and giving it to you.
Yeah, in a pretty package. In a beautiful package. So thank you, Seneca. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your energy and your influence. You have made a huge difference in my life. It's been a blessing to have known you for what? 2 months now?
2 months.
2 months. And we go way back, man.
We go way back.
Kicking it chopping it up.
Chopping it up.
So we want to give a shout out, as always, to the rest of the Open Minds family, to the Kindreds, to Satisfy My Soul family with the Healing Project _DFW. If you are looking for community, as so many of us are, check out these platforms, because these are places that you can meet Seneca and myself, that you can be able to fellowship and have conversation that is open-minded, that is conscious-based, and just to be able to express yourself. I don't think enough of us get the opportunity to express who we are learning we are, because every day we're learning something. So thank you for tuning in to this amazing episode of Energy in Motion, all about fear. What the fuck fear? That's really what the hashtag's from. What the fuck fear?
I'm with it. I'm with it.
So as always, Energy in Motion family, you get to feel whatever you feel, and you will always deserve to heal. Peace.
Peace. Love you.